Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us and joining us for our discussion around AI and managed travel. It's quite interesting, but certainly AI has become the story of our time. Certainly this year, 2025, I think we've seen more AI in relation to the travel program than at any other time. The speed in which this has picked up has been quite remarkable, not just in travel, but also in day-to-day life. And any of you that have been at any of our industry events in 25 will have seen you can't take three steps across any conference or exhibition floor without bumping into somebody that's telling you all about their AI offering. So, what we're here to talk about today is this changing the way that we work in corporate travel, or is it just changing the way we talk about things? In order to do that, I've brought some very intelligent people along with me on the journey to have the conversation and to talk about what we can do in our industry. So we're joined by Ian Spearing, who is the Director of Travel at Arcadis. Colleen Kearney, who's a travel management consultant and travel manager of many, many years' experience, and Daniel Senyard, who is FCM Travel's own AI and innovation expert. So, thanks all for joining me today and for having the conversation. So, I guess my first question that I'd really sort of invite to you, Colleen, is how can companies and travel managers differentiate between the strategic value and the hype of the AI applications currently in managed travel?
Yeah, I think it's really a point of looking for where the strategic interventions are, right? So chatbots, virtual assistants, those things have been around for a while. Are they getting better? Yes, but they're not really the strategic interventions, right? So, I think that in a travel program, really need to look at where are your time drains, where are your pain points, where's your productivity loss, and then look for proactive ways to integrate AI into helping you resolve those issues, right? So it comes from, really being proactive instead of reactive to what's happening in your world. And I think that's where, AI can really play a part.
Yeah. No, I think that's really key. And I know that, when we looked back over the history of tech and innovation in our industry over the last, say, 30 years, it's been quite revolutionary. These days, when we sort of look at what's coming into the industry with all of the generative AI, Ian, what do you think are some of the areas which are most exciting, and which are some of the areas which you think are just frankly overrated hype?
Yeah, well, I think the inflated pieces around expectation that AI is going to be able to solve and do everything, and something that's really core to AI is actually the human element to it. So, how do we actually use people in a human-centric way? But I think for me, it is touching on those points that Colleen's mentioned around data, process efficiencies, and I think thinking of AI in isolation, just your travel program, I'd actually propose looking at it from an end-to-end process. That's where I'm spending a lot of my time, is how do we match all this data up and make some really good insights from that, but actually make some of the downstream expense process a little bit more efficient for our travelers.
Interesting. And it's interesting that you bring expense into this as well, because I think that's quite key when you're looking at that whole end-to-end process, because, the trip is not finished until the expenses are submitted, right? And I know that you have strong feelings about this, Ian, and visions of never having to do another expense report again, which would be amazing.
Well, I think if I could create that, I think I'd be a millionaire. But I think that's probably the pain point for a number of travelers and people that are traveling frequently, having to fill in those expense reports. So how can we use data and AI reference points, so then humans can really focus on those human-centric tasks? Because there's got to be a better way, I think, to do an expense report, or not at all, which would be great.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And I think that touches on some of the areas that I know, Daniel, are very close to your heart around how are we using AI? So, are we genuinely innovating to a place where, for example, like Ian says, you wouldn't need to be able to do an expense report, or are we really looking at enhancing our existing workflow?
Colleen brought up the virtual assistant element. And I think that that actually is what, well, they have been around for a little while and are getting better. I think that the application of them in the travel industry is quite interesting because it gives us as travel managers or a TMC an entirely new interface to engage with the traveler. So beforehand, you had your OBT and your like pre-bookings and approvals and policy and stuff such. And then you had the expense, which Ian touched on. But there was a whole big gap there where honestly, TMC apps and such weren't super engaging for a traveler to use on the road unless they absolutely had to. I think the virtual assistant allows more value, more touch points throughout the journey. So that's kind of I think a new thing we're going to start seeing is the value prop of the technology. But yeah, I mean, I think we don't know where this is all going to end up. We're experimenting. At FCM, we've got our AI group that's constantly trying to look at like what do we solve today instead of just recreating today's technology with a little sprinkle of AI. What's the brand new thing that wasn't possible, 2 years ago that could be built now?
Just the areas that I know we've discussed before is when we first started down the technology side. Initially, the apps were just like mini websites
Yeah.
until the killer app came into our industry. Colleen, if we kind of take that, do you think it's fair to say that really a lot of the AI that we're using within our programs these days is more around user experience and enhancement rather than sort of blowing the doors off how we approach the programs in their entirety?
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's been the focus, right? It's been, front and center. How can we interact in a different way? How can we make the interactions more efficient? But we can't forget that the reason we travel is because we bring people together, right? And
Right.
there's purpose and there's meaning and there is benefit in doing that. So I do think there needs to continue to be a level of sophistication that's built into the engagement that the traveler has with AI, right? Whether it's the virtual assistants and the chatbots, and I think they're very simplistic right now, and there is an evolution that we're experiencing. So yeah, I think it's been surface level to this point and in enhancing the traveler experience. And I think that as we move along, we definitely need to continue that sophistication, that level of sophistication, so that it feels more and more like a human experience and like a personal experience. And I think we're making progress towards that for sure. I think for a travel management program, there's certainly a lot of opportunity in the back office and kind of back room
Mm,
optimization that we can take advantage of as well, that hasn't really been blown out yet. So things like, Ian mentioned the data consolidation, or this is a data rich industry, and
right.
there are lots of sources for information and data that I haven't seen, anyone figure out how to bring it all together and overlay it on top of each other and then make sense of it. That's a very manual process, that in my humble opinion, would be really beneficial for managing a travel program and helping
Brian,
engage on a different level.
And I
you're
think
so
with that
right.
that data, sorry, that
Go
that
ahead,
that
David.
that sort of level of data, and then that additional touch point on trip means that we have so much more contextual understanding. So like corporate travel has been very reactive. The traveler or the travel manager asks for something and then there's something given back to them. Whereas we can flip that now and be proactive and say, we know based on dates and times and geolocation and prior actions, you are now in a new city you've never been to, and we can actually reach out to you proactively and say, have you thought about this or try that? So you almost flip it from like this responsive duty of care. Like I have
Yeah.
to help you if you need help, but I'm waiting to find out if you have to reach out to me, to saying like there's a duty to care. We can reach out, we can make sure you're good, we can provide resources and access to things without you even asking for them because we have this data trove that hasn't been utilized, and now this new interface that is contextually aware of where you are in your journey. You get back from your trip, we know you're probably going to ask for an invoice when you open
Yeah.
up the chat interface. So we can kind of like anticipate and be more proactive. So I think that's kind of the interesting shift we'll be making.
You raise a really interesting point there. And when you were talking before, Colleen, the thing that came to my mind is as an industry, we've been trying to solve the question of articulating the value of a trip over and above a virtual interaction, or how do you measure the success of a business trip at all? Right? That's a question that we've been trying to define for years. And I think, Ian, is this something where you think AI can help? Because if we listen to the exchange that Daniel and Colleen have had just there, to me, in addition to the stuff that is improving in the personalization and the user experience, that kind of data accumulation and insight that can come from that whole AI piece is starting to, at long last, lead us into that space where we can articulate the value of a trip and an ROI.
Really interesting question, Joe, and actually one that I think about for most travel managers is where do you face most of your time as a proportion? Is it that shiny traveler experience that the whole travel industry is looking to go after? I'm not so sure that's where time best spent is. There's a lot of internal department interactions that happen about how we're working and interfacing with finance to make the reconciliation process better. How are we helping determine client-facing teams understand their value of taking the trip versus maybe the revenue they're generating? And then actually, how do we use travel behaviors to help maybe build a health and well-being program that actually encompasses travel and the experiences that they're having? So that's where I'm spending a lot of time myself, is trying to determine what the value of taking that trip is, what the carbon impact will be. That's something we haven't touched on as well, where AI is critically important. And then how much revenue do we drive from the business, and what's that total trip cost?
Ian, do you feel like those priorities, the sustainability, overall wellness, obviously being related to finance and such, travel is very financially driven and ROI driven. So you're looking at those elements and adding those into the equation. Are the people up above you, without naming and shaming, do they care about these things, or are you sort of combining this holistic picture of cost with well-being and sustainability to kind of like push change from your department, or is that sort of coming from the top down?
I think that's a North Star for most programs, I believe,
Yeah.
is how do we have a well-traveled program that is efficient, has the most cost effective methodologies, but actually, when we think about some of the things we pull as levers as travel managers, travel bans, focusing on CO2 impact, cost of a trip, these are things that we haven't actually been able to provide upwards and as an enabling function that travel is, and also talent attraction and retention for businesses. It's really critical that we sort of infiltrate those departments to show the value. So I think focusing on those parts of the travel industry are probably vastly more important and drive more value than maybe the shiny app that may be integrated to many other platforms. So that's where I'm going to spend most of my time with the program, because I think that's where I'm really going to demonstrate the value proposition of a travel function in many businesses where some of them are under scrutiny of their value.
And I honestly think like people, there's a lot of like hype around AI taking jobs. And I think like what you said there is like, I think it's incumbent on all of us, no matter what your job is, to actually like look at what new capabilities or new data sources you have access to and almost redefine your own role so that you're not replaceable. You're sort of expanding your scope. So you're no longer just focusing on like optimizing fares. You're now looking at that more holistic picture, which like you as a human are able to look holistically and use the AI to empower that expansion of role without having to like work 80 hours a week. But you kind of redefine your role and even the role and importance of your business unit. You sort of can get more eyeballs because you can show more stuff.
Think one of the key things that does concern people is really about, is this empowerment or is it replacement, as you say? I mean, I think that is one of the key things. So what Daniel, you've spent a lot of your career in this space in terms of AI and innovation and tech developments. What skills do you think travel professionals need to develop to make sure that they retain the control over their AI programs?
I think that there's a big shift where people need to become generalists. There's a quote from a guy called Tim Ferriss, an author, and he sort of says, specializations for insects. As humans, and especially humans who now have all these like tools, being able to be a generalist and not just say, well, that's not in my role. My job is X, Y, and Z, and I don't do anything outside of that. Really trying to expand and be just informed enough about data and about policy and finances and such, where you don't have to be an expert anymore. You can really just use these AI tools to like multiply yourself. I kind of like the phrase of it, like it makes you, it's like me to the power of AI. I basically can improve myself all over. So if you can just increase your base knowledge about a lot more topics and use AI to fill in the gaps, I don't know that there's necessarily a specific uh, skill you need to pick up. It's just a little bit of a lot of skills to kind of be more of that generalist, so you can speak to a lot more things and be more valuable to your company, basically.
Maybe we should ask AI.
Exactly.
Colleen, maybe. Colleen, can you give me some examples of where? Because I know this is also a subject that's been very dear to your heart, and you've certainly driven the programs that you've engaged with a really sort of tech AI focus leading forward. Can you give some examples of how you've managed this within the programs that you've previously managed?
Well, it's tricky, right? Because there are some boundaries that you have to operate in. The tools that are out there, are very public, and I think companies are struggling to kind of put those boundaries in place for use with inside of the company. So I think there has to, you have to be very careful what you're putting out into the general AI tools, whether it's Copilot, Chat GPT, whatever it is. And then you have to really make sure that the information that's coming back is valid and true and right. So there's not a lot that I've seen that hasn't been accurate, but there's been a few instances. I would say where I have used it the most is and seen it used the most. Number one is in validating information that I've spent a lot of time manually putting together,
Mm,
right? I put it in, and then even something as simple as putting a trend slide together and saying, okay, I've done all this research. Here's what I think the top 10 trends in corporate travel are. And then I go to an AI tool and ask the same question. And I would say nine out of 10 of those things are, they mirror each other. Um, so that's one way, is just validating information that I've been accumulating. Benchmarking data, is another area where I think
mm.
I use it for benchmarking data, and how does my program compare to other programs? What's out in the market? There's a lot of information out there, so being able to gather that perspective through the use of the tools is beneficial. Again, you have to be very careful about what you're putting out there with respect to your own program. So I think that it's been, and then what I've seen in our program, with our partners, are things like AI use and disruption management, and having contractual uh, obligations to where there are push notifications from suppliers to rebook, and we get there's some priority that's given to corporate customers, things of that nature. There's again the virtual assistants and chatbots, and as those evolve, I think we'll see more and more use of those. But so those are some of the practical use cases that I've used and that I've seen. I think there's a huge opportunity for it to go beyond what I'm doing today, like Ian was explaining in his last comments, and just being able to have the power to make better decisions, to more
Right.
strategically think about what we're doing in our travel programs, and giving us time back to be able to really focus on the more strategic work versus the administrative or more day-to-day operational kind of time drains that
It's
we see a lot in our programs.
It's really quite interesting because when we talk about the analytics around AI and some of the decisions that it can help us churn, and we see it a lot when you're looking at complex contract management and how you pull it together in how we can really ascertain what value is being delivered. But there is a question mark, I think, around does AI fall short in delivering empathy or making complex decisions with empathy? I mean, I struggle to think of any other category that any of us manage within a business that has the same level of stakeholder engagement in your businesses that travel does. So, does AI even need that empathy? Is that important, or is it something that you can train it to do? I know, Daniel, you always tell me that AI is not magic, it's learning, right? So you have to teach it to do something. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that, I think the points about it, like, that there's not a lot of empathy. And that if there is, it's sort of manufactured empathy, which can come off disingenuous. In the loop remains critical because people bring vision, taste, judgment, empathy into the equation, and these are things that like the AI is just not doing.
Right.
And maybe in the future, but like really now we still have to be very involved, and that's a good thing. This is just like I said, making us upskilling us in multiple things, but we are still at the center of those interactions.
Ian, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, controversially or not, I don't actually want my AI to have empathy. I want my AI to be able to handle, process, and enable a human interaction or operator sort of model where I'm putting data in, I'm understanding what that output might be because there's some strong AI usage, and then I take the human piece out. And I think a good example would be around meetings and events. So, what is that attendee experience like from all the data points, from footfall traffic, from attending sessions and rating them? And then what does that output from AI help an event manager or an event director create new experiences at meetings and events? So I think that's one area that is, for me, meetings event is always lagging behind maybe a transient piece that actually AI and human in the loop will really come well together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting, I think, Ian, that you make that point, because I think about, at first I was thinking about things like going to the bank. The things that are most important to people are their time and money, right? And so
Right.
when you, it's a different experience when you go to an ATM versus when you go to a bank teller and you have that interaction, right? And that's something that's very important. I think the same in travel, but then. I think in most of our programs, we have an embarrassing number of people that still need hand holding, right? And still want that personal interaction and that sort of thing. And that keeps agencies alive and well and people employed and that sort of thing. But then I think of the Amazon experience, right? There's no human interaction with Amazon. When there's a problem with your order, it's all done online. I think that the key is really to make sure that we are making AI as efficient and easy as it is to use Amazon and build that type of model, to where it's not necessary, or it's not even, I don't even think about interacting with a human when I think about an
Mm,
Amazon engagement.
Agree with you to a point, but travel is definitely more emotional. Like you miss a
Yeah.
flight or you get stuck. There's still going to be people who want that help. Like I like to keep the analogies going, I guess. I really like this sort of like medical. The way medical's going is, you used to have to wait in line or, in the waiting room to see the doctor, and the doctor had 10 minutes to spend with you, and you're in and out no matter the severity of what's going on. Whereas like virtual e-medicine now, if I just need a referral, I can do a virtual visit with a doctor and
Yeah.
whatever. So that means when I actually do go in, that person's got more time to spend with me if I need it, and so I think
Yeah.
that's sort of like triaging. What can AI and virtual assistants help with? FAQs. You don't want to sit waiting on the phone for 10 minutes to find out what your luggage allowance is, but if you are stuck and you're going to miss your
Yes.
daughter's dance, you definitely want someone to commiserate with you and not just like treat you like a number.
Well,
So I think it's trying to
I,
get to that.
But I also think that when I get disrupted and a flight gets canceled and I get an immediate text that says you've been rebooked on this flight and
Yeah,
it's just what I would want, right? That
totally.
like automated, engagement, and that the airline really knows me or the agency really knows me and they've done what needs to be done. And I'm not standing in the line with the other 100 people waiting to get to
Yeah.
the desk to get a new flight, right? So
Well,
I think there's some, there's some there, it's an evolution,
Yeah.
just like we
and
were talking
I
about
think that's
before. And
right. I,
yeah,
but I think, Colleen, you make a really interesting point about Amazon, not to endorse Amazon, but what they do particularly well is when the tech is not going to be able to help you, they do make it easy for somebody to call you and for somebody to resolve the problem. And at that point, you've got the human interaction and they're fixing it. So when you translate that back to the travel space of disruption, for example, we've booked you on this flight, but that flight that they've booked you on isn't going to fit the purpose for whatever reason. Having the
yeah,
option to be able to re-engage really quickly to get moved on and discuss options that are going to work for you then suddenly does become really valuable, because you can either just go, yep, great, I'm good with that, and off you go. Or you go, yikes, that's not going to work for me because I'm going to miss my daughter's dance, or I don't want to
Yeah.
connect, or something. So I think that's where that kind of interaction does make it easy. So
yeah,
I think as we sort of progress our industry, that's going to be the thing moving forward, right? It's just going to be the new way that we work, which I guess sort of leads me to a question to all of you, and Ian, let's start with you. If you're dealing with a travel manager who is nervous about AI or doesn't know where to start, or somebody that's just coming into the category, what's the one area you would say to a travel manager where they should start?
First part would be don't set too high expectations. But I would look at repetitive tasks. So things like, what's this process in a policy? Where do I do my expenses? Those frequently asked questions that we get from travellers, or what's my agency telephone number? How do I do my expenses? Look at those maybe central mailboxes or support functions you've got that are doing those repetitive tasks all the time, and see how you can lay on some very low level AI, but actually will give you a huge amount of value and time back.
How
I
about
kind of,
you?
oh, sorry.
would say have a general understanding of what AI is and how it's being used in the industry today. And then again, what are your pain points? What are your repetitive tasks? What are the areas where, you can make improvements with AI, and also lean on your suppliers to understand what they are doing with AI and how it can help you. Understand the cost, because that's going to come into play in the decision
Yeah.
making and how it gets implemented in your program. But certainly, they're a wealth of information that we often don't utilize enough to understand what's out there and what can be implemented very easily.
Great point. And that is going to, I have a slightly varied version of that question for you, Daniel, which is, what are the questions that travel managers should be asking their providers when AI is featuring heavily in their pitch?
I think even a level up from that, it's important not to get swept away. And as a, part of the AI team here, it sounds silly, weird for me to say this, but like, doesn't matter that it's AI. Like whether it's AI or not, it's really like understanding what is the problem you're trying to solve, what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Once you can validate that this solution is solving the problem in the way you want solved, then you can start to ask some of those questions are going to come from security and privacy, which is our data being used to train public models? So we don't want our proprietary stuff to go out into ChatGPT, into the world, then disappear and be used to improve other models. So we want to make sure our data is secure and private. Can it be deleted? You want retention policies. I do see people going a little bit overboard with saying we want to make sure our data is deleted immediately, but then you can't come back the next week and ask a follow-up question because the data is not there anymore. So I think extending
Right.
those to a reasonable point. I mean, you won't believe the number of RFPs that are like, we want to do you immediately delete the data? And it's like, yeah, but then, that's the end of the interaction, basically. these days, because the sort of security and privacy have jumped in so hard, most companies you speak to, if they're relatively mature, are going to be able to just give you, here's an overview of our AI, of our practices. We are buttoned up because we know you're going to ask these questions, and every customer we talk to is going to ask these same questions. So it's no longer, them trying to answer a question for the first time. They've
Right.
seen the questions over and over.
And I think just in closing, because this has been a super interesting conversation and there's lots to digest. I think just in a word, what would you say is the most critical mind shift for embracing AI within travel? Colleen?
Just being open to the possibilities, and what it can really do to help you be more strategic. Don't be afraid of it. So I would say dig deep in terms of what are the differentiators and how it can really be used, and have them build your business case for you in terms of how you're going to be able to sell it to your leadership.
Ian?
The one word I would use would be trust. Trust in the AI and what it can do. Trust in your decision making of why you need to use AI, and trust in the decision and output that comes with that. So then you can make better decisions and add value into your business.
Good one.
Daniel, how about you?
My word would probably be redefine. I think it's incumbent on all of us to basically look at what we do, what AI would enable us to do, jump in and try and learn as much as you can. YouTube is great at just like learning, quick learning. But you should redefine your role and your responsibility before someone else does it for you. So like beat them, get ahead of that, and don't be passive. Be active, jump in, redefine your role, work out how much more value you can bring. Yeah.
And I guess the thing that I would say to wrap all of that up, and it's an expression that I use often, and that is the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of innovation. So be prepared to fail.
Yeah.
Be prepared to jump in and adjust and make edits as you go and do it quickly. Learnings always come in failure. Well, team, thank you so much for all of that insight and all of that knowledge and that sharing. Really interesting discussion. I certainly enjoyed everything, and thank you so much for sharing. For more information on this and more insights around the industry as a whole, please download the FCM Consulting Insights Report, which is available now.